Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I've got Ray Fittipaldo on with me. We're going to talk about Roman Wilson and the Steelers wide receiver situation. How good can Roman Wilson be, and where will he line up? More on that, as well as a preview and first look at the NFL schedule release scheduled for tonight, Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Also, Andrew Destin on the road covering the Pirates. What's going on with them as they head through Chicago? All that here and more on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive Podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive Podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. He's Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers, and we both work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Find all our written work at post-gazette.com. Find us here on the North Shore Drive Podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday here on your favorite podcasting apps or on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your daily content that comes out from all of our Pittsburgh sports writers, as well as our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of this show. And as always, this show is brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, get the best experience because they have over 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are from the local Pittsburgh area, and 80 of those local beers are available on tap. More on them later. Ray, we talked a lot about the offensive line on our Monday show, so I wanted to switch to the next pick after the offensive lineman, and that was Roman Wilson, the Steelers wide receiver, selected out of Michigan. And we got a chance to talk with him. We got a chance to kind of, go over some things there and get a sense of things. We have talked a lot about the Steelers potentially adding a number 2 wide receiver somewhere in free agency or in a trade. What if you were to put a number, like let's say 1 to 10 of the likelihood that maybe Roman Wilson is the number 2 wide receiver for this team when the season starts? What's the likelihood of that?
Well, I mean, in my mind, Chris, it's a higher likelihood than Van Jefferson or Scotty Miller or Quez Watkins. But I still think if Roman's not up to it, and they're going to give themselves time for this to play out, he's going to get tons of reps in OTAs and minicamp, also early in training camp. If I had to put a number on it, 30% that he's a number 2 guy, I still think there's maybe a major move that Omar has up his sleeve, and they're just going to wait on it maybe until the price comes down, that sort of thing. But like I said, of that group of receivers, I think Roman Wilson is probably the most talented. But he is a rookie, and we'll have to see if he's ready for that challenge.
Certainly. And he's a guy who he's moved all over for Michigan. Last year, he played like 2/3 of his time as a slot receiver, 1/3 of his time as on the outside. The year before that, he was almost exclusively in the slot, but the year before that, he was almost exclusively on the outside. So literally in Michigan, they put him all over the place, but they also didn't throw him the ball a whole lot for a guy that was as talented as he was. This guy has sub 4.4 speed. He's a 4.39 44-yard dash. He has really remarkable hands. He's only had a drop in either of his last 2 seasons, a single drop that is. And when they targeted him in the red zone, they targeted him 7 times in the end zone, and all 7 times he came down with the touchdown. I wonder if part of the overlooking of Roman Wilson is just because he played for Michigan, where they ran the ball first, played defense, and they didn't need to throw him the ball a whole lot.
I get that, and I think that's something that has to be discovered, to be quite honest with you. Jim Harbaugh is a guy who is going to play football a certain way. The one positive, it is a pro-style offense, but he wasn't getting the number of he wasn't putting up the production that other receivers in the first and second round had, just because of the offense that he played in. So I do get that argument. I understand it. Maybe that's going to be a part of the equation. But the fact is, he hasn't done it at the college level. He hasn't done it at the pro level yet. Let's be a volume guy. We know he's talented, but in the NFL, you have to produce numbers. And I think Roman Wilson has to prove he can be that volume type of guy, that guy who can produce for you in big time situations. So hopefully he is that guy for the Steelers' sake. If not, they're probably going to have to pony up a 2025 draft pick, and likely a high one, to get a true number 2 in here.
Agreed. And to your point, the most ever receiving yards he had in a season in college was 789, and that was last year.
Yeah.
Before that, the most he had was 420. So, like, to your point, he doesn't have that production. Now, he did have 12 touchdowns last year, and that's impressive. And I think it shows his ability to make plays. But, part of what we heard him say at training camp is that he's working with Zach Alzani, the Steelers wide receivers coach, at coming out low, because even he admits, I come out too high in my stances. He needs to come out lower. He needs to get through his fundamentals and needs to set up his routes better and be sharper there. And that's where I think things could be really interesting for the Steelers if they're able to get him to do that. But a spot on the field to help players who are struggling with that is the slot, because it's a lot harder to jam wide receivers in the slot because they're not on the line of scrimmage. So they naturally just get a simple cushion that gives them just a few extra steps to work with, so that the slot corners can jam them. And often those aren't the best corners on teams. So that might be where they want him. And I think that's why everyone's looking at who can be an outside wide receiver next to George Pickens, so that they can move. You can line Wilson out on the outside on occasion, but maybe not exclusively, especially in his rookie season.
Yeah, listen, Chris, the last thing you want, and I understand Arthur Smith is going to have a run-first approach. I think that can certainly be an offense that works in the NFL. But the last thing you want to do is have George Pickens over here double covered 75% of the time, and then the guy opposite him, the number 2, whoever that is, doesn't have an ability to get open, and he's not a threat for your offense, and that ends up being a detriment for your offense. So, I get it. They're going to be a run-heavy team, but when it comes time to, need to do something in the passing game, you need 2 legit receivers out there. I mean, I can make an argument you need 3 legit guys who are threatening to defenses. And right now, the Steelers only have 1 proven guy on their roster. I was looking this up earlier today. Scotty Miller, 11 catches last year. Quez Watkins, 15. Calvin Austin, 17. And then I think Van Jefferson had 20 between the Rams and his stint with the Falcons last year. I mean, that's just not NFL production for a number 4, let alone a number 2. Chris. So, I get it. They're going to give Roman Wilson every opportunity to be that guy. But if it's not him, I don't think there's another guy on the roster who could do it.
Yeah, that's the other thing about it. And look, the Steelers, all these smaller signings, the Scott Millers, the Quez Watkins, the Marquez Callaways, even the Van Jeffersons, these are guys who I think the Steelers are kind of just setting out like a safety net. Like, hey, you know what? What if you get lucky with one of these veterans who can give you a Jericho Cotchery type of season where he's like not prolific, but he's just solid, and he gives you like a steady guy who, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields can just dump the ball off to, and they'll get yards. And then you can still have George Pickens and Roman Wilson be, the bigger playmakers of your offense, kind of like what Allen Robinson kind of was trying to do at the third wide receiver, just, with actual production numbers behind it. Because Robinson didn't get to do a whole lot. I get making that at least the initial attempt, but I do think the Steelers, and we caught wind that they were at least making phone calls. I think the Steelers want to see how that group plays things out and see if they don't need to make the big trade. And then if they do, then they can see, all right, how desperate is this organization to find a wide receiver like that who can play on the outside, take a lot of attention, and help balance the passing game a bit more.
Yeah, and listen, another point, if Pat Freiermuth is at his best,
that's another
not
thing.
Lining up in line, but if you actually flex him out into the slot, then Roman Wilson's going to have to play on the outside if that's what's best for your offense. So that, all of these things have to work together, right? I mean, it's how they fit the jigsaw puzzle. So, we're going to find out, is he strictly a slot guy? Can he play outside? Where does Freiermuth fit best? It's a big job and a big challenge ahead for Arthur Smith to get to know these guys, but that's what this spring is for. That's what training camp is for. And, I think we talked about it last time we did a show. If Mike Tomlin is not happy with the way things look in mid-August, believe me, they're going to make a move. They will make a move to improve this offense to a point where they think they can be better. But there's plenty of time for that to play out until that happens.
Absolutely. We're going to get back to the Steelers in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I want to talk about the schedule release, which is coming out tonight, 8 p.m. You can check that. You can check that out. We'll have all that on post-gazette.com. But I want to get Ray's thoughts on where some of the Steelers' biggest matchups could land for them on their schedule release. All here on the North Shore Drive podcast, plus Pirates talk coming up soon with Andrew Destin, who's on the road. But first, I want to remind you about our great sponsors at Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. When you go to Mike's Beer Bar, they're right on the North Shore, right across the street from PNC Park. They're the perfect place to go before, during, after Pirates games because they offer 500 different available beers. 300 of those beers are local, and 8 of those local beers are available on tap. They have outdoor seating so that you can get to experience the beautiful Pittsburgh weather at this time of the year. It's lovely out right now, and you get to see the skyline, the Roberto Clemente Bridge. You can also go inside and watch sports on one of their 20 different televisions that can tune to whatever game you want, whether you got a bet on NBA or NHL or another Major League Baseball game. All that can be had in there, and they have amazing food options like steak on a stone, where you get your choice cut of steak brought to you on a heated stone, where every piece you cut off, you press into the stone, and you choose how well done you want every bite of your steak. It's Mike's Beer Bar, the best bar in all of Pittsburgh. Go there today, and when you get there, tell them Chris sent you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the Steelers' schedule release. Now, this is being recorded midday-ish on Tuesday. So if there's a Steelers game that has been leaked by the time that we've talked about this and the time that this gets published, sue us. But let's talk about some of the things that we can look at here. The Steelers' Week 1 game is always interesting. Did last year break the streak of non-home games, or is that streak still up as far as to start the season? I can't remember right now.
Yeah, because the 49ers
they were here.
Yeah, came here and they took over the stadium. So I think a lot of people remember that. Apparently the Pirates are home the first couple of weekends in September, so it's a pretty good bet that they will be on the road. So listen, how about Russell Wilson going back to Denver?
That's where I'm going.
How about Arthur Smith going back to Atlanta, where they also have to play a road game? Chris, they're going to hold back 2 or 3 important division games for December, right?
Yes.
And usually, the way it's been for the Steelers, it's usually been like Bengals Ravens or Browns Ravens, Browns Bengals those last 2 weeks. So, yeah, it could be a division opponent early again, but the way they've been doing it recently, I think it's probably going to be a non-conference opponent or a team out of their division. So a couple of possibilities there, but it's going to be fun to see what's unveiled here on Wednesday night.
Well, we also know this. If it's going to be a divisional opponent, there's only one team it can be, because the Ravens are set to play the Chiefs Week 1 and the Browns are set to play the Cowboys.
Yeah.
So those are 2 out. So it have to be the Bengals here. But also, it's kind of lining up that it almost has to be an away game, because you get 8 home opponents. The Ravens, the divisional opponents, the Ravens and the Browns are playing. The Cowboys are playing the Browns, so they're off the mix. The Chiefs are playing the Ravens, so they're off the mix. That's half your home opponents right there. And then the Jets, who are also coming to Pittsburgh this year, they're playing the Niners, so they can't be. So the only teams that are on the home schedule that the Steelers could even play are the Giants, the Chargers, or the Bengals. Whereas on the away side, yes, the Browns are out of consideration, the Ravens are out of consideration, but only the Eagles, who are set to play the Packers, are the only other team there. The Raiders, the Commanders, the Colts, the Broncos, the Falcons, all of them free game. And I agree with you, going on the road there makes a lot of sense. And if I'm the NFL, and I want drama, I want theater, I want people tuning into this game for a reason, why not make it the Denver Broncos? Because here's the other thing. There's a lot of people talking about how this quarterback race could play out. Russell Wilson might start Week 1. People feel like Justin Fields could replace him by midseason. If you're the NFL, you want to get this game in as soon as possible before that can happen. So if I'm the NFL schedulers, give me that Week 1, Russell Wilson versus Sean Payton, Steelers' new quarterback, rookie quarterback for the Broncos. All the drama will be perfectly set up. I agree with that for a Week 1 game. But let's talk about some of these other games that you're looking forward to. The Steelers play some really top level quarterbacks in the NFL. Of course, you got Patrick Mahomes, you got Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, but you also got Justin Herbert. You also have Aaron Rodgers, Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Jalen Hurts. This is a year where their defense is going to be tested by some really talented quarterbacks.
Yeah, listen, if you look at their defensive rankings last year, Chris, people remember, they were number 6 in scoring. Well, they were 21st in the league in total defense. That defense gave up a ton of yardage. The main reason they were able to keep the points down, number one, was turnovers. They were one of the best teams at creating turnovers. Number two, they had the 6th ranked red zone defense in the league. Now, there's no guarantee from year to year that you're going to be able to turn the ball over the way you did. That's one of the more that's one of the stats really that you can't predict, right? I mean, strip sacks and all that, the way the ball bounces. So they're going to be have to be a team that's better between the 20s this year. You can't be giving up the amount of yards they did last year and still expect to be a top 10 defense. Now, you mentioned it. Listen, I understand Cam Hayward was hurt. You had some other guys go down. Holcomb, the inside linebacker situation was really bad late in the season, but they weren't facing the types of quarterbacks last season that they're going to face this season. It's a much harder road. It's one of the more difficult schedules in the NFL. So everyone's talking about Russell Wilson and, the Steelers are going to break this 7-year playoff victory drought. I get it, but this is a much bigger task for this defense this year than what they went through last year, for sure. If every one of those quarterbacks stay healthy, this schedule is probably twice as difficult as that schedule was last year.
Absolutely. But part of also countering that is making sure your offense possesses the football to keep the ball out of those quarterbacks. And that's why it's going to be so huge for the Steelers offensive line to come out strong, for the Steelers run game to come out strong, and for Russell Wilson or whoever starts at quarterback, if it's him or Justin Fields, to come out, limit the turnovers, but also make sure that they're keeping possessions in the hands of the Steelers. Keep the ball, move the chains, get put some points on the board. Don't need to be, top of the line, but definitely keep the defense from having to live on the field the way that they are. And they might have a chance here with that because they are playing some of the defenses that were the worst in the NFL last year. The Commanders ranked dead last, the Eagles third to last, the Colts, the Broncos, the Giants, the Chargers, all of them ranked in the bottom 10 in defense last year. And granted, things can happen, things can change, injuries, new players signed, drafted, all of that stuff. But I think this is going to be a year where the Steelers, you look at the last 3 seasons, it has been defense carries and offense just gets by. The defense can still maybe carry this, be a leading force of this team. Yeah. I think this is the year where they need this defense to not have to carry it. They need the offense to pitch in a lot more than they have since the 2020 season.
And let's face it, that's why they went out and got Russell Wilson. That's why they're continuing to invest in their offensive line. There's only so many years, Chris, that you can count on this aging defense to play the way they did in the previous seasons. Listen, Cam Hayward just turned 35. He's coming off a sports hernia surgery. And Landon Roberts is 30. Larry Ogunjobi is 30. TJ Watt doesn't seem like it, right? First round pick in 2017. He is going to turn 30 in October of this year. So not only do you have one of the most expensive defenses in the NFL, you also still have one of the oldest defenses in the NFL. And we saw last year how old guys can break down on you. It's not Cam Hayward's fault. It's just the way it is. Landon Roberts got hurt late last season. TJ got hurt late last season, missed the playoff game. Larry Ogunjobi's been hurt since he's gotten here. They've done everything they can do to get him to Sunday. So, they've started the process of getting younger with Keanu Benton and Joey Porter. The Patrick Queen thing, one of the great things about that guy's still only 24 years old, right?
Yeah.
So that's a big positive as they try to get younger on defense. But, my point is they've been really good for such a long time. They need help. And I think that's your point too. They need help this year. Russell Wilson's got to step up and get it done this year for the first time since really 2018, 2020, since they had a competent NFL offense.
Absolutely. He's Ray Fittipaldo of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thanks, Ray, for joining us. We'll get all of his written work at post-gazette.com. I'm sure him, Brian, and Jerry, they'll have our team breaking down the schedule once we know what that schedule is. Ray, thanks so much for joining us. We got to switch topics. We're going to get to Andrew Destin, who's on the road covering the Pirates. We've seen Paul Skeens come up. He's going to be coming up again soon. We'll get all the looks on what the Pirates are doing on the road right here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Right after this, I'm Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We switch to the Pirates with our man, Andrew Destin, who's out there in Milwaukee covering the Buccos. They did drop a game 4-3 last night. They are now 1-1 in that series with the deciding game of the series at 1:10 p.m. Eastern time. First pitch, Perez to take the mound there. But Andrew, I'm not going to ask you about who's going to win that game. Everyone's just kind of looking at the Pirates and they're seeing all the dysfunction, all the problems, the things that people were hoping were behind this Pirates organization with, all the young guys that were coming up here. And if you're looking at one major reason or thing that the Pirates could do to fix that they aren't doing, to get themselves back into the winning column, back above 500, and make them a team that people can start to see some belief in for the future, what is that one thing that you feel like they aren't doing right now?
Yeah, it's tough to say because they are such an inconsistent team in so many aspects, right? And I think that's the simplest, most generic place to start is that they aren't consistent. I mean, you look at the last 3 games. They had their greatest offensive output on Saturday when they scored 10 runs in Paul Skeens' debut. They also had, I believe, 16 straight balls in the mound when pitching. So that game to me was the perfect example of the dichotomy that exists between the absolute peaks and the total valleys of this team. Establishing consistency would go a long way. Otherwise, you're going to continue to be the team that the Pirates are, which is, basically a 5 games below 500 team, kind of hovering around there the last few. The offense, for one, that's one place to start, how much that had been a struggle since mid-April. It's shown signs of life 2 of the last 3 games, or 2 of the last 4, excuse me. But then you have a game like Tuesdays where you have 3 hits. So there's no consistency. That's the easiest place to start. How do you go about doing that? Maybe that's changing your approach a little bit. Maybe that's being more willing to embrace small ball. They did that on Monday where they had guys bunting for base hits. They got a couple of homers. They also had some 2-out hitting. None of that was to be found aside from a couple long balls on Tuesday. So to me, it's the way that this lineup is constructed. You can't play baseball like you're the Atlanta Braves or you're the LA Dodgers, where you just go 1 through 9. Everybody's going to mash. Everybody's going to take the ball out of the park. You need guys to be able to do it all, to do it a myriad ways. And on the pitching side, it's done its job, but the bullpen's started to be a little bit more inconsistent. I'm sure we can discuss that about the 6-man rotation, how that's been a little bit of a detriment to the bullpen, forcing them to be a little beleaguered. So across the board, consistency just isn't there. And there's a lot of places to start, Chris.
One place to start that a lot of people talk about is Rowdy Tellez, who early on in the season had a couple big hits here and there. People were excited about, and of course, he was the guy that came to the defense of David Bednar and said, like, "Hey, we don't boo this guy." And now he is one of the people that people look at as the biggest problem with the team at the plate. He's hitting 178 right now, on base slugging percentage of 486. What can be done about first base other than just moving someone? Like, why do they keep putting him there, or at least maybe not giving him a chance to let him rest? Like, what has gone behind how he has continued to stay there and keep getting chances when it's an obvious problem that he is not helping in the middle of the lineup?
Well, I think Derek Shelton brought up this point. I believe this was on Monday. I want to say it was on Monday, but the general consensus of his argument was, he's not going to get any better if we don't give him any reps, and we need him for this offense to get going. And I know a lot of people probably don't want to hear this, but to some extent, I agree. I mean, if you don't have Rowdy Tellez hitting cleanup, hitting as he's capable, 2 years ago hitting 30 home runs, then this lineup is what it is. Redundant. It's a lot of the same guys. It's people who are kind of athletic, can kind of put the ball in play, can occasionally run into one. But like Rowdy Tellez, you see him. I mean, it passes the eye test. This is a guy who's a different hitter in theory than pretty much everybody else in the lineup. Reason number two, they keep running him out there is because you don't commit to a guy financially with as much money, relatively speaking, that the Pirates invested without at least trying. So to me, you give him at least the end of the month. Get to June, see what you have in the guy, get through this road trip. But yeah, I mean, it's tough because guys like him and Jack Sawinski, I don't know what the exact combined stats are, but they're both hitting about $180, $170. The power, I want to say they combined for 4 home runs or maybe 5 home runs. You're expecting a lot more than that from those two guys who, as left-handed hitters, have basically been alternating as your cleanup guys, and neither has done it. So that's all to say these guys need to be producing. They're not. How do you get them to produce? Well, you keep playing them while hoping that you can mitigate it a little bit and spell them with more starts for Connor Joe and more starts for Edward Olivares, probably than expected.
I feel you there, and I get the payment part. Like, you got to play with the roster that you've built and give guys time to figure things out. And I guess brings me back to the question I think everyone's asking: what can be done coaching wise or managing wise to help get these guys out of a slump? Is there adjusting the order? Is there switching things around? Is it just a vibe thing, or is there something that you see in just their approach to the plate, the way that they're the timing of when they're going after pitches? What is the thing that you think needs to change the most from maybe a coaching aspect of this team?
It's a great question. I would say that there's a lot of places to start. I think the biggest one, I would say the biggest one to me of where you would start is just in terms of individual approach. And I think a great place to start, I'm sure Pirates fans will like this, is watch Andrew McCutchen's at-bats on a daily basis. This guy is locked in. Watch the way that O'Neill Cruz is swinging the bat. He's locked in. Brian Reynolds had the 5-hit game. These guys appear to have tangibly different approaches than the rest of the group. And that's not to say that they're going against the grain or anything. If anything, I'd say they're probably embracing the team-wide culture a little bit more than some other guys. And when I say that is that they're taking pitches, they're working deep counts, they're working deep at bats. I would say that, yeah, I mean, listen, if you can get through a starting pitcher more earlier than the Pirates have, I think that would be their benefit, because we're seeing it in this Milwaukee series that when you get to the back end of a good bullpen like the Brewers, same case against the Cubs when they played them and the 4 against the Cubs, that like when you get deep in a bullpen and you can't do much against a starter, then you're asking for it. And that feels like the general theme with this Pirates team. It's very simplistic, is they're either tagging a starter for 4 or 5 runs and winning, or they only score 1 or maybe 2 and they lose. It's very straightforward. The game is essentially over by the 6th inning. And that goes both ways. I mean, that's MLB today. It's, you look at the Pirates bullpen, in theory, should be a really big strength. Recently has been a slide, but you look at the last 2 years where it was, it's Colin Holderman in the 8th, David Bednar in the 9th. So the easiest place to start there is it worked early on. It worked at times last year. I know a lot of people want to lambast it, but I would say being more patient, taking more pitches, getting deeper in counts, and making starting pitchers work harder and have more trying innings where it's more high stakes, high pressure. That to me would be a great place to start.
And it's interesting because the way you describe it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the guys who are at the top doing things they're supposed to do, McCutchen, Cruz, Reynolds, the guys that are delivering, it seems like they're buying in on what the Pirates are selling or trying to get their players to do. So if that's the case, is maybe the problem that guys just don't buy into what the Pirates are doing, and that it's not, the message isn't being accepted, or is there a problem in the message in general, just as far as how they've told these guys to approach?
I would actually say it's neither. I think it just might be the roster construction itself. I mean, you look, and I know that's probably a disheartening message to receive, but you look 4 through 9 at the lineup. Okay, guys like Jack Sawinski, Michael A. Taylor, Rowdy Tellez, Jared Triolo, Nick Gonzalez, either Yasmani Grandal or Joey Bart. I mean, you list these names, and maybe as individual pieces at their individual position, they each offer something. Like, for instance, Triolo at second base has been tremendous defensively. Taylor has been tremendous defensively in center. Grandal and Bart, both veteran catchers that have been able to help the pitching staff that's been off to such a good start. But you list all of them individually, it's not exactly a lineup that strikes fear, and I think it's on no onus than the roster construction itself that these are the guys that you're turning to 4 through 9. The top of the lineup, yes, it's ebbed and flowed. Yes, O'Neill Cruz has been hot and cold. Reynolds has been hot and cold, back hot again. McCutchen has gotten unbelievably unlucky, and you can look at those advanced metrics from the leadoff spot. But all that's to say that I don't know that 4 through 9 it should be like the Pirates have preached, oh, like there's these projections we have that we're falling short of them. And I think that's true. But I don't think there's this vast difference that means if all of these guys were performing up to standards, that this would be a team that's 7 games north of 500. Like, I think the difference we're looking at here is a team being 5 games below and maybe a 500 team, which goes to show that this team kind of is needing to be reliant on pitching, which has been good in the starting role, not great in the back end. Everything's kind of just falling short of expectations, except for your top 3 of the lineup, except your starting pitching. And I don't need to say this to all of you guys. That's not enough for a 26-man roster. That's not enough for consistent winning.
Indeed, it is not. We will see how the Pirates continue their run. They are 19-24 heading into Wednesday afternoon's contest, with the Brewers finishing up that series, and then they head to Chicago, where Jared Jones is set to start Thursday, and Paul Skeens back on the mound Friday. He's Andrew Destin. He'll be on the road for all of this, covering this. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Be sure to read all of Andrew's work on the road there at post-gazette.com, as well as Noah Hiles. Thank you also to Ray Fittipaldo for jumping on the North Shore Drive podcast and talking all things Steelers. We'll be back Friday with more on all things Pittsburgh sports right here in the North Shore Drive podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work here at the Post-Gazette, as well as I cover Pitt. And also check out all the shows here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube by searching Post-Gazette Sports. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers. Again, back Friday with the end of the week's episode of the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.